Good morning, bonjour. We'll start in about 1 minute. On va commencer dans 1 minute. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Welcome to the Audit Committee meeting of Tuesday, October 22nd. Bienvenue. We'll get right to we have a short agenda. We'll get right to it. Any declarations of interest, colleagues? No? Thank you. Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes for our meeting on July 4th, la Réunion du 4 juillet dernier. Carried? Carried. Thank you. We have one item, the Office of the Auditor General, report on follow-ups. Le Bureau du vérificateur général, le rapport sur les suivis de vérification. Il va y avoir une présentation du vérificateur général. Je vais demander à la vice-présidente, la conseillère Meehan, de lire la motion, to read the motion to bring on the reports.
Whereas the supporting documentation titled Office of the Auditor General, Report on Audit Follow-ups and Detailed Audit Follow-up Reports was not circulated with the agenda package, therefore it be resolved that the Audit Committee approve the addition of this document for consideration by the committee at today's meeting pursuant to Section 89(3) of the Procedure Bylaw, being Bylaw number 2019-8.
Thank you. Is that motion carried? Thank you. And just to note, Councillor Hubley had sent his regrets prior to today's meeting. And so with that, I will, Mr. Auditor General, you have a presentation, and the nature of the presentation is that he or his colleagues will touch on all the reports, and if we could hold our questions until after the presentation. If that works for everyone, I'd appreciate it. Monsieur le Vérificateur Général.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. We're here, of course, to present the follow-ups. Ici, on a les employés de le Bureau de vérification générale. Et avec moi sur le bureau, j'ai des vérificateurs adjoints, Sonia Brennan, et aussi Ed Miner. Here you've got a list of the staff of the Office of the Auditor General, and you must realize that it is not possible for myself or even the three of us here at the table to do the work that we do by ourselves, and I thank the members of the office for the help that they give us every day. Dans le processus de vérification, il y a 4 phases et nous sommes ici pour la dernière phase, c'est la phase de suivi. There are 4 phases in the audit process. You're familiar with the planning phase, which includes when we visit all of the members of council and seek out areas that we wish to audit. But before we begin every audit, we spend a significant amount of time planning that audit. After the planning is done, we conduct our field work, we prepare a report, we get management's comments in relation to our recommendations, and then 2 to 3 years later, we conduct the follow-up, and that's the final phase. So the Office of the Auditor General follows what are known as best practices, and those best practices take their direction from the standards of the Institute of Internal Auditors, and in a few minutes we'll talk about the City of Ottawa audit standards after we've presented our the presentation on the 4 follow-ups. Dans les normes principales de l'Institut des auditeurs internes, les normes disent que le chef de la vérification doit instituer un processus de suivi afin de surveiller et de s'assurer que les mesures adoptées par la direction ont été mises en œuvre efficacement. In the standards from the Institute of Internal Auditors, it states that the chief audit executive, which in the case of the City of Ottawa is the Auditor General, must establish a follow-up process to monitor and ensure that management actions have been effectively implemented. Now, we see that in the City of Ottawa bylaws themselves, and as I said, we'll be talking about the City of Ottawa audit standards shortly. Le Bureau de vérificateur général effectue des suivis de vérification pour toutes les missions de vérification. Il le fait environ 2 ou 3 ans après le dépôt du rapport de vérification ou avant ce délai. At the City of Ottawa, the Office of the Auditor General conducts audits on conducts follow-ups on each and every audit. And as I said earlier, we wait about 2 to 3 years for management to complete their work, complete the recommendations that they promised council they would implement. There have been occasions in the past where we've done our follow-ups earlier because of the urgency of some of the matters, and there have also been occasions where we've waited to do our follow-ups later because of longer time that it would take on the part of management to implement. So the audit follow-ups themselves identify really management's progress on the implementation of recommendations. The follow-up report presents the overall evaluation of the progress. Aujourd'hui, nous présenterons 3 suivis de vérification. Un suivi de la vérification des épaisses en parallèle de 2015, un suivi de l'examen sur les méthodes de traitement de l'argent pour des centres de services à la clientèle Laurier, et un rapport sur 3 déficits dans les dépôts déclarés dans le centre de services à la clientèle. There are 3 audit follow-ups presented today. There's the follow-up on the audit of species at risk, the follow-up on the review of the Client Service Center Laurier cash handling process and cash discrepancies, and then a follow-up on the investigation into 3 reported Client Service Center deposit shortages. The results show that management has addressed almost all of the issues raised by the audits to improve management practices. Nous pouvons voir que 98% des recommandations sont adoptées par la gestion. We can see that 98% of the recommendations have been adopted and implemented by management, and that's certainly good progress, and management should be commended. And now the Deputy Auditor Generals will take you through the reports themselves.
Thank you. Nous avons fait le suivi des 8 recommandations faites dans la vérification des espèces en péril de 2015. The recommendations in this audit can be best characterized as opportunities for improvements. The activities were focused on improving existing protocols, clarifying roles and responsibilities, and enhancements to training and communication. We found strong progress with 7 out of 8 recommendations fully implemented. One item was partially implemented. This was with respect to a recommendation for the city to adopt best management practices for maintenance activities in both sensitive and non-sensitive areas in order to protect the species at risk and their habitats. While the best management practices have been developed and now are operational, we were unable to provide full assurance on this aspect as no projects were fully complete at the time we completed our work to see that they were in fact being used in practice. However, as mentioned, the practices are now in place. There has been training used to supplement, and we're confident that the practices will be used and operationalized. Thank you.
We followed up on the 26 recommendations made in the 2016 review of the CSC Laurier cash handling process and cash discrepancy. You may recall that the recommendations made in the review were broader than strictly CSC Laurier operations. As such, when we followed them up, we tested implementation of the new procedures at both the Orleans and the Laurier Client Service Centers. We found solid progress as all 26 of the recommendations had been fully implemented. Nous avons fait le suivi de 6 recommandations faites dans l'enquête de 2017 sur 3 déficits de dépôt déclarés dans le CZC. We followed up on the 6 recommendations made in the 2017 investigation into the 3 reported CSC deposit shortages. Similar to the follow-up of the 2016 Laurier CSC review, we tested the implementation of the new procedures at both the Laurier and at the Orleans Client Service Centers. And again, we found solid progress, and we assessed that all 6 of the recommendations had been fully implemented.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, you'll remember that that up until a few audit committees ago, we talked about a follow-up report that was embargoed because of litigation that was in progress. That report was the follow-up to the 2010 audit of the West End flooding event. That presentation was made to council in camera because of the litigation, and we are now making that report public. En conclusion, Monsieur le Président, le Bureau de vérification générale à la Ville d'Ottawa suivait des pratiques exemplaires. The Office of the Auditor General, in conclusion, we can say that they follow the best practice that is required by the Institute of Internal Auditors by implementing follow-up audits and reporting on them back to Audit Committee. Follow-ups are an important part of the audit process, and we can certainly say after these 3 reports that management is committed to implementing the council-approved recommendations because of their excellent progress in these 3 audits. I'd like to conclude by thanking the staff at the City of Ottawa who have given us their complete cooperation as we go about our work, whether it's working on our audits or working on the follow-ups. And that concludes our presentation, and we will pause here in case there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Auditor General, and thank you for your work on behalf of the residents of our city and for these 3 follow-ups and the West End flooding follow-up. And you're prepared to take questions with respect to all 4 follow-ups. On the three follow-ups that we presented, the other follow-up is just being made public, and if there are any questions, we will endeavor to find answers within the files, but we will do that offline. Very well. Vice Chair Meehan? Do you want to go first?
Thank you, and thank you, Auditor General. My question actually is to management, if I can direct a question to management. Is that possible? The cash handling, please. Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to commend the department for implementing the recommendations that were contained in the Auditor General's report. But I just want to go back to before the recommendations were implemented. I want to know why it takes the Auditor General's department to identify a lack of procedure when it comes to having personnel deal with cash. It seems from this report that there was very little training, very little standards, very little procedure. Then I want to know why. Do you just throw somebody in there without giving them training on the proper handling of cash? Why was this, why do we have to go through an audit to determine and identify all the areas that you were missing when it comes to cash handling?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question, and it's a good one. We had procedures that were being followed. They were not clear enough. We had not had any discrepancies in cash. So we were, to some degree, unaware that perhaps our procedures weren't as clear as they needed to be, and there was some room for interpretation. Everybody was trained, they are trained, and they continue to be trained. We have annual training now. The audit that we received was very, very informative, and it did identify for us, you know, the real nuances of cash handling that an expert brings to the table that we were unaware of, and it wasn't until we had a discrepancy that we really were made aware of maybe some of the misinterpretations of our policy. So it's completely solid now. We have had no problem since we've put in this procedure that's very, very detailed.
Are there other departments that, and other areas that these recommendations can be applied to increase the quality of the standards of training?
Madam Vice Chair, the cash handling standards apply to the entire city of Ottawa, no matter where that operation is. So any changes that have been made to the cash handling standards, staff is required to implement them across the city.
Okay. But if we hadn't had a discrepancy, we could still be, our standards could be still lacking when it comes to the way we handle cash at the city. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Kavanagh, please.
Thank you. In terms of the species at risk, I just have a quick question about how we work with other agencies, because species at risk aren't just a City of Ottawa thing. It involves everyone, and I can't help but think about the NCC, because whenever we're talking about species at risk, it's usually involves with Greenbelt and the NCC. Is this look at the working relationship we have with other agencies?
Mr. Chair, through to you, Councillor. That question might be better directed at management. With respect to the audit itself, our report outlines all the areas we looked at. We looked at information sources that staff were using, and we made specific recommendations around those, as opposed to specific communications and regular operational interactions with other parties.
Okay, well, because it's certainly something you can't do in isolation. It's obviously something that has to be done with many partners. So I hope that is part of it. So maybe I can ask management at another time. In terms of the watershed, given the situation we had this spring, can you talk about lessons learned from, are we putting in place, is management putting in place the kinds of protection we need for future situations? What we saw in the past, we're going to have in the future, because we've got, we had a situation this spring where we were caught off guard in terms of a 100-year flood that happened after the one from the 2 years before. So these situations are going to keep happening. So what lessons learned are being applied from this situation from the Carp River watershed?
I think the department, either General Manager Willis or Mr. Gauthier.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Gauthier will assist me to talk about the Carp River specific situation. It predates my time here, and I have an issue of perceived conflict of interest. So on Carp River, Mr. Gauthier will answer any specific questions, but your question was more general. So first, on species at risk, we work in close cooperation with the National Capital Commission, the conservation authorities. This is done on a very regular basis. There is a high degree of coordination between the agencies in the region, and even our counterparts on the other side of the river. So I can assure you that is a regular dialogue that goes along. On the issue of broader watershed management and the spring flood events, we will have information in time over exactly what happened in this spring's event and what caused it. But we are doing a climate resiliency plan right now, and we're doing new climate projections in collaboration with the NCC, which will be ready early in the new year, which will inform our infrastructure planning and our infrastructure master plan updates. If you have something specific on CARP, Mr. Gontier can answer that.
Okay. What lessons learned have we got from the Carp River watershed in terms of what we're seeing for the future?
Chair, the flooding that we experienced back in 2009 that affected the West End were really related to high-intensity events that affected our sewer system and our storm drainage systems, not river flows like we have experienced in 2017 and 2019. So although both resulted in flooding, they're very distinct sources of flooding. There are a certain number of lessons learned that we've learned from the flooding back in 2009 and some of the preceding flooding around how we increase the resiliency of our drainage systems to be able to better protect our community and homes against those types of flooding events. And I think what we've seen over the last decade with those improvements, we've seen very little property flooding as a result of those types of storm events.
Is this related to climate change, these events?
Well, the events that we saw back in 2009 were really a factor of communities that were built to the standards of the day, didn't have the same level of protection as to what we afford now. So part of it was really trying to retrofit those communities to provide a higher level of protection and increase the resiliency, which should also help from a climate change perspective.
Yeah, so we need more ways to absorb groundwater. Like that's one of the big issues, is that we didn't account for that in the past, and now we have to for the future.
Yeah, there's a number of factors. One of the big factors is how pipes can only handle so much water. So the question is basically when the capacity of the pipes are exceeded, how do we manage that flow on the surface? We have much better practices now in terms of managing that flow on the surface. Certainly reduction at source is a key part of the overall strategy.
Okay, so we're applying this to across Ottawa right now? Because one of the issues that I found, even though we had a flood situation, that I actually hear more about groundwater problems. Sudden downpours of water are a bigger issue than the actual river flooding. So I take it this was a similar situation, just in terms of the water having nowhere to go.
Correct. The 09 flooding wasn't river caused. It was really related to the intensity and the duration of the storm events.
Yeah, that's what, and that is actually probably one of the bigger factors for people to having flooded basements, et cetera. So we have lessons learned from this.
Yes, and if we look at the 2009 event, the city and council approved about 36 million of improvements to increase the resiliency of the West End community. So there have been significant investments made to increase that level of protection.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Santiri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to my call for those questions. But I think I want to say thanks to the Auditor General for, I know there was a lot of holdback because of legal issue with the Carp flooding, and that's the reason it was not released publicly. Am I correct? Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. Because of the litigation, the publication of the follow-up report was embargoed. And now that the litigation is over, we can publicize it.
My question to you, if I may, were you satisfied with the investment the city, the private developer, whatever they made to mitigate that flood? Because since then we haven't had an issue. Even we had high rise in water in 2017 and 2019. We did not see a major flood in those areas. So does that mean the auditor was satisfied with the work took place?
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, although that's an excellent question, we haven't done any work to be able to substantiate an opinion one way or the other. Okay. But certainly those are the types of projects that could be looked at and considered for future audits. But we Generally, we always support the process here at the city where every time a decision has to be made, that a business case is built to ensure that all of the alternatives are presented with all of the costs, all of the pros, all of the cons, and the eventual decision is appropriately supported, so that when a decision is taken, you can see the logic behind that decision. And I would expect to see the same sort of information to support the decisions that were taken in this case if we were to audit that project.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to congratulate the auditor and staff for reaching those conclusions and working together and achieving what the audit has uncovered. So I want to say thank you to both management and the auditor's team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor DeRoos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to comment on, I want to thank the Auditor General and the team for presenting this update for us. I know that specifically the client service file has been very complicated, and I know that you've done a lot of work throughout the last 3 years on that. And I just want to congratulate actually the management and the team, because if you look at from the 40 recommendation we've done, there is 39 already completed, one partially is done. That means that there is communication and we'll be able to adjust our policies and move forward, because I know that the amount of the cash that the city handled year after year from the taxes and what, it's good to have a better process, robust process. So thank you, and I want to give congratulations to actually to Donna Gray and to Nancy Greenfield for their effort and working with your team to making sure we implement this, because I know my office and the ward, I am in the client service and I see the training and the new implementation, how it's making a difference and making sure that we are protecting our taxpayers. So thank you for all of you for that. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all. I had a couple of questions, and it would be for Nancy, please, and her colleagues. First of all, I wish all the Auditor General reports were like this, and like my colleagues have said, congratulations to staff for implementing the recommendations so diligently. Can you tell us a little bit about the training that staff is now having with respect to the question that the Vice Chair had posed, the training that staff now has with respect to cash management, and more specifically, the ongoing compliance and monitoring by senior management to make sure that that training continues, that it's not in a vacuum, that there is oversight, and that training is being done well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to address the piece on training, it's been really a multi-pronged approach. What we've done is combined e-modules, so a combination of e-learning policies, a combination of in-person training, classroom training, and that's from the moment we onboard staff. And secondly, when it comes to the oversight, what we've put together is a fair amount of reports that are produced on a monthly basis by our quality assurance team and several other partners from the finance department. And through that, management can monitor and determine if there are any compliance issues.
So thank you for that, for compliance issues and if there are issues. But what I want to get to is the fundamental assurance that senior management takes that training and will follow up on ensuring that the training continues, that the training is done, that the training is consistent, that the training keeps up to date with new risks and new threats to our cash management, to our to any of our policies.
So, Mr. Chair, what we do is when staff are hired, they're hired and they're trained on the cash handling policy. Once a year, they're obligated to do an e-learning module, which they must complete a test at the end of it, and they must get 100%. We save that as a record that they have completed that training. As we change the policy, we will change the training. We have made additions to the policy on recommendations of the second audit that we received. And we then have reports that the management team has a standing item on their agenda every month where they review any feedback that we get from our quality assurance team, and again, the reports referenced by my colleague from finance. Our quality assurance team will spot check what's going on every month, a certain aspect of the policy, to make sure that, that over the course of the year, they are spot checking every aspect of the policy to make sure that it is being complied with. Any non-compliance, it is built into our policy that we are able to discipline, and that can go anywhere from a written warning to, suspension, depending on the infraction, and we have had some of those instances where we've seen non-compliance. So we're taking this very, very seriously. This is the #1 focus, I would say, of our management team with respect to services delivered at the client service centers.
Thank you very much. I think the Vice Chair had a question with respect to, just a little follow-up with respect to the value and the work of the AG.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hughes, I guess this question goes to you. I'd like to ask you if you can detail the role and the function of the fraud and waste hotline, how it's administered, and how it's funded.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair, the fraud and waste policy directs the responsibilities and the responsibilities of both my office and management in supporting the fraud and waste hotline and in carrying out the various investigations. The Office of the Auditor General is responsible to administer the fraud and waste hotline, and we receive all of we are the first people that receive all of the reports and then decide what will be done with those reports. The fraud and waste hotline is paid for out of the budget of my office, and it's currently involves about, as I report every year in the annual fraud and waste report, about 2 FTEs plus the costs of operating the hotline. So that's probably in the neighborhood of $230,000 to operate the fraud and waste hotline. The next year, with the request for proposals that's out on the street now for the changes to the fraud and waste hotline, the costs will probably increase to about $300,000, and that comes out of my budget, which is about $2 million.
Well, you just answered my follow-up question. So we're looking at about the cost of running the fraud and waste hotline, $300,000. So as the percentage of your budget, then what are we looking at? Approximately.
Right now, it's about 12%. It'll probably go up to about 15% in the new year with the changes that will come from the request for proposals that's on the street right now, and that'll be about 15% of our budget.
Okay. Are there other municipalities who have fraud and waste hotlines, and how are they funded?
In answer to the first question, Madam Chair, there are many municipalities that have fraud and waste hotlines, but there are many that do not. Those that do have fraud and waste hotlines certainly see it as a valuable process, and there are those that are contemplating implementing it. And as far as the costs to support the fraud and waste hotline, when you compare the budget of this audit office to others, when you're comparing the dollar value as a percentage of the budget, if you're comparing against a municipality that doesn't have a fraud and waste hotline, then it isn't a valid comparison.
Do we know what the rationale is having your office encompass or pay for it? Like, why is the fraud and waste hotline part of the AG's office budget?
Madam Vice Chair and Mr. Auditor General, can we maybe pick this up? At the next meeting, we'll be discussing the Auditor General's budget. Perhaps that would be the right time to follow up with these detailed questions.
Okay, but we're looking at bottom line, Mr. AG, $300,000 for the cost of the fraud and waste hotline. That comes from your budget.
That would be
Okay.
in 2020.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So thank you all, colleagues. We're on item number 1, the follow-up reports. Seeing no other questions, is that recommended that the Audit Committee recommend Council receive the report?
Receive.
Thank you. Any in-camera items? Thank you. Notices of motions, inquiries, other business,
Mr. Chair.
adjourn. Yes,
Oh.
Mr. A.G.
Chair, if you recall, there was another item that we were going to append after the questions on the standards for internal audit. An update to the,
Was that for the,
it's just a short presentation. It'll take about 2 minutes.
okay, does that need to be added to the agenda?
Well, it was to follow, if you recall, Mr. Chair, whenever we come to Audit Committee, we always have a short little piece on the,
So it's a complement to item number
it's a
1.
complement to item number 1, correct?
Go ahead.
OK. Monsieur le Président, les normes de vérification de la Ville d'Ottawa se fondent sur les normes de l'Institut des auditeurs internes. The audit standards, returning our attention to the audit standards, as I indicated earlier in our presentation. The audit standards here at the City of Ottawa are based on the Institute of Internal Auditors standards. The Institute of Internal Auditors is a worldwide organization that is recognized as the guiding body for audit professionals. But there is included in those standards standards in relation to consulting services, and there are internal audit groups around the world that provide consulting services to management because of the independent requirements of Auditor Generals in the Municipal Act. It is not possible for this office to provide consulting services, so the City of Ottawa has always adopted the Institute of Internal Auditor standards, except for the standards in relation to consulting services. The City of Ottawa audit standards were approved by Council in June 2012, and they're referenced in our bylaw. So the standards themselves are based on a snapshot at a point in time of the internationally recognized audit standards. And this is just a little piece of housekeeping. The Institute of, not surprisingly, the professional standards change over time, not significantly, but if we were to look, for example, at one particular standard, and there's no need for everyone to read the entire standard, but you can see the part that is bolded is a change to the standards since 2012. And as professional auditors, we follow the standards as they are amended, but we find ourselves from time to time not necessarily in conflict, but there could be different, because there are differences between the City of Ottawa standards and the IIA standards. You'll see in the next one, there was an addition that's come out since 2017. So the point that I'm making, Mr. Chair, is that since the purpose of the City of Ottawa standards when they took a snapshot at a point in time in 2012, the intent has always been to follow the Institute of Internal Auditor standards. This minor housekeeping item, I'm recommending that with midterm governance approaching, with the help of the city clerk, we could make the changes so that as the Institute of Internal Auditor standards change from time to time, that we'll be in compliance if we just change the wording around in the bylaw around our standards. And that's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we could, we'll discuss this more fully and bring this forward at midterm governance.
Well, if the committee is agreeable, we would take it as direction to work with the city clerk to come back with recommended changes.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Auditor General. So we were at, that was at other business. The next meeting, just for adjournment, the next meeting will have the work plan of the Auditor General for 2020, the Ernst & Young audit plan for their audit of the financial statements, the annual report, and the budget. And that will be, that is a date that will be set very shortly for that meeting. And now, motion to adjourn? Carried. Thank you all. Merci.